So glad to see everybody this morning. Well, we are in the season of Lent.
Yes.
And we have this week and next week before we enter into Passion Week with Palm Sunday and then Easter. And this is a preparation time, a season where we focus on self-examination, we focus on repentance, we focus on drawing closer to the Lord. And so we do the things during this season that posture our hearts to move ever closer to Christ. We spend this season focusing on reading His Word, praying, fasting, because those are the things that position us. We also spend time together. We're meeting every week on Wednesday nights together through Lent, having dinner together, praying together, hearing God's Word together. And so those are the things that draw us ever closer to Christ. And we're preaching a series on forgiveness and reconciliation in this season, as we understand that forgiveness is the thing that God has done for us. Reconciliation is the thing that we have been called to as His followers, as ones who love Him and called to be His children. It is the most powerful act of love and grace for us to forgive and to be reconciled. Forgiveness is the one thing that the followers of Christ and the church must excel in.
Yeah.
We must be known for people of we must be known as people of reconciliation. We must be known as people of forgiveness, as people of peace, as people of love. And so we have to spend time learning, and spend time studying, and spend time practicing the skill of forgiveness and reconciliation. This is what our city most needs. This is what all people most need. Our natural inclination is toward retaliation. But it's through Christ that we learn reconciliation. We're looking to build a people who will choose peace instead of violence. We're looking for our community, this community around us, Baylor, Edison, Parkside, all over Baltimore. We're looking for Baltimore to become a city of peace rather than a city of violence and retaliation.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's recall our foundations as we have been going through this series. There are two foundational truths. You need to say these with me. Nothing is unforgivable. Nothing is unforgivable. And no one is undeserving of forgiveness.
No one is undeserving of forgiveness.
Next week, as we... Let's go to the next slide, too. I think I have one more slide. These are key truths for us that create the foundation for us. Those others are foundational truths, but these are the reasons why we forgive. We forgive because we're all human.
Amen.
We share a common humanity, knowing that we have all been in need of forgiveness at one point or another.
Yes.
Amen?
Yes.
All of us
Amen.
have done something to
Amen.
hurt someone else. We are
Amen.
all capable of doing something that requires forgiveness from someone else. And so we understand that when we have been offended, when we've been hurt, we've been on the other side of the equation.
Yes.
And there has been someone that we have needed forgiveness from.
Mm-hmm.
And so this encourages us to forgive others.
Yes.
We also share in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah.
All of us. Look at the person next to you. Look at the person next to you. All of us share the image of God. We have all been made in His likeness. And we are all His children.
Amen.
God has forgiven us.
Yes.
We love because he first loved us. Amen?
Amen.
Even while we were his enemies, he did what? Sent Christ.
Yeah.
He forgave us. Even when we didn't deserve it, he was gracious and merciful towards us.
Yes.
So if we can be forgiven of a huge debt, how much more could we forgive those small debts
Amen.
against us that someone else has committed? So, next week we will finish this series. And what I'd like to do next week is hear some testimonials from some of you. Hear some of your stories of forgiveness. Hear some of the ways that forgiveness has transformed your lives. Maybe you've been forgiven of something huge from someone else. Maybe the Lord has placed you in a spot where you had to, maybe you got in a spot where you had to forgive someone else. So, if you have a story as we go through this, as we go through the morning this morning, and if you have a story that you would like to share, it doesn't need to be long. I want to hear from 2 or 3 of you. If you have a story you'd like to share next week as part of our message. I'm going to share the transformational story of forgiveness in my own life this morning. I didn't know that I needed to do this, to forgive this way, until I was close to 30. And I had been working for Young Life, and I'd been in ministry already for maybe 7 years. I was almost finished with my seminary training. We had 2 girls, and they were entering into elementary school already. And all of a sudden, maybe it had been creeping up on me, but I hit this wall. An emotional place, an emotional wall where I didn't realize that I had not been feeling very much. I knew that I needed to have compassion, and I was out of resources. I didn't have what it took to love the people around me the way they deserved to be loved. And this burnt me out. I reached a crisis point in ministry and in my relationship with Mindy and my girls, and I realized I needed to get some help. And when I went to speak with someone to get counsel and to get prayer, what the Lord exposed to me was that I needed to forgive. And he took me all the way back. The Lord took me all the way back to a day when I was 7. And in my experience, many of us get broken this way very early. Usually before we're 13, the enemy, someone else, touches us, breaks us in such a way early on. And this happened to me. I can still remember it like it was yesterday. I was standing on the bank of the pond at my grandfather's farm, the farm where my dad grew up. I'm standing next to my grandfather, and my father's standing next to him. And I want to swim in the pond. It's hot, it's August. I don't want to work in the garden. I don't want to weed any tomato plants. I don't want to pick any peppers. I don't want to clean out the horse stall. You know what I'm talking about, Charles? I just want to go swimming. I'm a 7-year-old boy. I want to go swimming, play in the creek, get wet, cool off. My grandfather grabs me by the arm, grabs me by the bicep, and he says, "You need to work. You're weak." And my dad said nothing. Now, what I didn't understand at the time, but I understand now, is that my dad had been living under the very same judgment his whole life from my grandfather. So in our family, the eldest son gets the farm, but you have to work for the farm your whole life. The farm was never given to my dad. He grew up knowing that he had to work for that farm and earn it his whole life. My grandparents were never gracious enough to him to say, the farm is yours, enjoy it. Even as my grandmother was dying years later, 20 years later, she refused to grant my father the farm. Wouldn't put it in a trust so he could just inherit it. It went into probate, and we couldn't pay the taxes, and we sold it. That's what my grandfather was passing down to me when he grabbed me by the arm and said, you're weak. You've got to work. So that's what I had been doing. The rest of my life, the rest of my childhood into my adulthood, what I did by going to college, by going into the army, by even entering into ministry, serving the Lord, I was proving my worth. I was proving my strength to my father and to my grandfather. How many of you know that doesn't work? You can only get so far with that before you're just done. And when I was probably 27, or do you remember when this happened? Probably 30 maybe, when this happened, I was done. And I had to come to a place where I could forgive both my grandfather, my grandfather who had actually died probably 10 years earlier. I had to forgive him, and I had to forgive my father. The interesting thing was when I went to talk to my dad about it, he obviously had no recollection of this at all. He did not remember the day. He never thought of this himself. He had never come to terms with it in his own life. In his early 50s, he still hadn't really dealt with that issue in his own life. But we actually forgave my dad. I know when this happened. I'm remembering this as I tell the story. Forgive me, but my dad and I did not have a good relationship as I entered into middle school and high school, because I resented this judgment that I had to continually prove myself to him, or felt like I had to. It wasn't something he intentionally put on me. It was something that I just put on myself. And so I rebelled against that in middle school and high school, and really damaged my relationship with him. And in 1999, the Promise Keepers did the march on, did the event on the mall. Do you remember that? Millions of men on the mall praying for reconciliation and forgiveness. I was living in Tacoma. We were living in Tacoma, Washington at the time, and my dad actually bought a plane ticket for me to fly back to meet him and to go to this event with him on the mall. And we spent the better part of 2 hours at one point in the afternoon, early in the afternoon, confessing to one another and asking for forgiveness of one another, and just weeping together over what we had done to one another and what had been done to us in our families, and restored our relationship. And now I can say that my dad and I love one another. We love being together. And I no longer resent being the eldest son of an eldest son of an eldest son in a Pennsylvania farming family. In fact, one of my joys is to, one of the ways I take Sabbath is, I try to do this once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, take 3 or 4 days in the middle of the week and go to my brother's farm that he just bought recently up in Pennsylvania and do the farming thing. But I can't do the farming thing right down here in the middle of the city. You can only grow so many tomato plants, and It's not the same. It's not the same as getting really dirty and working really hard all day, on a farm. So I actually did that this last week. I spent 3 days with my brother working with him on his farm. So I feel refreshed, having got my farmer on for a little while. I think all of us have that moment in our lives. All of us have a critical experience, like Erica shared hers with us briefly this morning. There is for each one of us has to have a critical encounter with forgiveness.
Amen.
That draws us back into the arms of the Father. Because the issue really was that I didn't trust the Father because I couldn't trust my own dad. This is how this works. I saw God the Father as another taskmaster, as another one who is just judging me on my strength or my ability or my skill, my performance. And I had to come to a place where not only did I forgive my father and my grandfather for putting that on me, but I had to also reconcile with God and repent from the belief, from the lie, that he was also judging me in this way. Because he's not. He's not demanding that I perform. He is not measuring me on my strength, on my performance, on how much I can get done for him. He just wants to love me as a son. He just wants to be my papa. He just wants to be with me. And he's pleased with me now. This message of the Father's love has just undone me. It continues to undo me. That when I wake up in the morning, I get an A. Before my feet hit the ground, the Father is pleased with me. And he's pleased with me for the rest of the day. Regardless of what I do or don't do, he's pleased. He accepts me, loves me, cares for me. All of us need to have that encounter with the Father. So today we're talking about renewing or releasing the relationship. This is the last step, the final element of our forgiveness process that we've been talking about. The first is telling your story, getting the facts out, explaining what happened to someone else. Then there's the part where the next step is naming the hurt. Articulating, explaining to someone how this hurt. Why did this hurt? Why is this important to you? What happened to you? How did it help? How did it hurt you? And then last week we talked about the act of forgiveness, and today we're going to talk about what do you do after you've forgiven someone? Where do you go with the relationship? What's next? Well, you have a choice. Just like you have a choice to forgive, you also have a choice. What should you do with the relationship after you've forgiven? And you can renew the relationship, which means you rebuild a new relationship. You choose to stay in with the person who has offended you that you have forgiven. You build a new relationship with them. We'll talk more about that. Or you can release the relationship. You decide that this is not safe for me, or I don't desire to stay in a relationship. I can't reconcile this relationship, and so I'm going to release this relationship so that it no longer controls me. The preference is always to renew and be reconciled. But this isn't a mandate. It's not a requirement. It's a choice that we have. We also get to choose how close we allow people into our lives. Now, we may not think that we have a relationship with the stranger who mugs us, the cheating boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse who left years ago, the person who sideswiped our car. We may not think we have relationships with these people, but a relationship is created and it is maintained by the pain we feel from the hurt that stands between the two of us. What do we do with our relationship with the friend who lied to us? Or the coworker who takes credit for our work? Or the parent who was abusive? We have a choice about what to do after we forgive. We can decide if we want to either renew or release the relationship. When your sibling or your spouse says, "I'm sorry for yelling at you," we forgive, and we can see ourselves easily continuing on in the relationship because we've invested in this relationship. This is an important relationship. It's a key relationship to us. It's not one we could release. We wouldn't want to. But when a friend says, "I'm sorry for lying to you and betraying your trust," we can forgive, and we can also choose not to see this person again. We can choose to change how much access this person has to us. We can put a boundary in as to how close they're allowed to come to us again. To renew or release the relationship is yours to make. It's obviously easier to choose the relationship. It's an easier choice when the relationship is close and you've invested a lot into that relationship. But the decision also brings the risk of being hurt again. Sometimes it's easier to choose to release a relationship with an acquaintance, a neighbor, a stranger, because we've not invested that much of our heart in this person. Renewing our relationships is how we harvest the fruit of what we planted by forgiveness.
Yes.
Renewal is not an act of restoration. This is important for us to get. Because we cannot ever just go back to the way things were. The hurt or harm or offense we suffered does not allow us to do that. We will always remember that pain.
Yes.
Forgiveness is not forgetting.
Amen.
Reconciliation calls us to create a new relationship out of the process of forgiveness. We actually have to work to build something new. This is how our relationships are actually strengthened, by going through the process of forgiveness and reconciliation. When we're hurt by someone who's closest to us, it's often because of something that they did, that because they don't understand us. Or we have not expressed an expectation and they have not kept it.
Yes.
There's important information about us that they don't know. And the hurt actually creates the opportunity to get those things out on the table, to talk about what's important to us. What has gone wrong that you did not understand? What has happened that has violated an important value in my life? And going through this process of telling the story, naming the hurt, choosing to forgive, and choosing to renew, gives us a framework for talking through the most important things in our lives. And this is the way we are able to strengthen our relationships. Renewing our relationships is how we turn curses into blessings. And we continue to grow through our forgiving. It's how we make restitution for what has been taken and set right what has been made wrong. This is how we make the enemy pay. This is how we take back what the enemy has stolen from us. Forgiveness and reconciliation are extremely powerful weapons of spiritual warfare. The enemy does not engage in forgiveness. Amen?
Amen.
And he does not want us to forgive.
Yeah.
His desire is that we would be separated, isolated, and hurt by one another.
Yes.
And he wants us to stay in that pain. He has no desire for us to come to healing or reconciliation. It's important for us to see that conflict with the ones we love most creates the most opportunity for healing and strength. We have to, this is something Mindy and I learned maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that there needs to be a shift in how we see hurt and offense among us. That when we're hurt by someone we love, instead of seeing them as the problem, we have to see them as our ally and the one we love. And the hurt that has occurred to us, the problem that has come between us, is actually something that's come from the outside of our relationship to come against us. And if we can stand together against the hurt and the pain and the suffering that has occurred in our relationship, then we can work together to have reconciliation. That's been the most important shift in the way we see our relationship. That's helped us the most to stay out of a place of conflict and in a place of peace. Do you see how that shift happens in our relationships? And we can see this, we can set this up in any of our deep friendships or family relationships, where if we can see one another as allies in this fight, then we can stand together against the things that have come between us. How do we genuinely release or renew our relationships? It's important for you to ask yourself, what do you need to be made whole? As you're going through this process, you need to spend time examining what has hurt you in a way, how has that hurt caused a need or exposed a need that's not being filled. Perhaps you need to hear the truth about the other side of the story. Why did this happen? Why did you do that? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What brought you to this place that you did this to me? Perhaps we need to hear that the other person who hurt us is remorseful about what happened. We want to hear an apology. We need to hear an apology. We want to know that there's some empathy and some understanding on the other side. We want an acknowledgement of the hurt. We may also need some restitution and some recompense. Maybe there's been damage that's been done that needs to be repaid. You know, when your car gets hit, it needs to go to the shop. When damage has been done, it needs to be paid for. We can't just say, well, it's okay. Because it's really not okay if real damage has been done. If real hurt has occurred, it's right, it's okay for you to be real about the damage that has been done. It's okay for you to name the need that you have in the situation. Because believe me, that need is not just going to go away. It's still going to be there. And for healing to happen, it's right for you to be able to ask, this is what I need you to do to restore trust. This is what I need you to do to rebuild our relationship. This is what I need you to do to honor me, to make this right. It's okay for us to do that when hurt has occurred. This is why it's important for us to walk through the whole process. You can't just lead with that. Folks don't understand where you're coming from. But if you start with naming the story, telling the story, telling the story and then naming their hurt. This is what happened, and this is why what happened hurt me. This is how that hurt. I forgive you, and I need you to do this for me. Is everybody with me on this?
Amen.
Yes.
I hope this is practical. One of the most powerful stories I've heard about this was on StoryCorps on NPR. Maybe some of you have heard this story. It's a couple years old. We would expect I just need to acknowledge that you're here in the room. And that this is hard for you. This mother and this young woman just lost their son and their boyfriend
Yes.
to murder last week. And we were with them yesterday at a candlelight. We want to let you know we're with you, to walk with you and stand with you in this. And I had this in my message before I knew you. I just want to acknowledge, I'm going to share something about a mother whose son was murdered. Is that okay for me to share? Okay. You would expect Mary Johnson and O'Shea Israel to be enemies. O'Shea Israel had been involved in gangs and drugs and killed Mary Johnson's son in a fight at a party. And as Mary Johnson recalls, their first face-to-face conversation took place at Stillwater Prison as O'Shea was about to be released from his sentence. When Israel agreed to hear her repeated request to see him, Mary Johnson said, "I wanted to know if you were in the same mindset of what I remembered from court when you were sentenced, where I wanted to go over and hurt you. But you were not the same 16-year-old. You were a grown man." And Mary Johnson shared with O'Shea Israel about her own son. And Mary's son became human to O'Shea. And at the end of their meeting in the prison, Mary Johnson was overcome by emotion. The initial thing to do was just try to hold you up as best I could, said O'Shea. Just hug you like I would my own mother. Mary Johnson said after she left the room, "I just hugged the man that murdered my son." O'Shea Israel said, "And I instantly knew that all that anger and animosity, all the stuff that I had in my heart for 12 years, I knew was over, that I had totally been forgiven. And I forgave you." Johnson founded Death to Life, two mothers coming together for healing, support groups for mothers who have lost their children to violence. We have some really similar organizations in Baltimore. We met one of the mothers that started Mothers of Murdered Sons. She spoke at the candlelight on Friday night. For Israel and Johnson's forgiveness has brought changes and challenges to both their lives. He said, sometimes I still don't know how to take it, because I haven't totally forgiven myself yet. It's something that I'm learning from you, he said to Johnson. I won't say that I've learned it yet, because it's still a process that I'm going through. She said, I treat you like I would my own son, and our relationship is beyond belief. In fact, the two live right next door to one another in Minneapolis. He said, you can see what I'm doing. You know firsthand. And if he falls out of touch, Israel is sure to hear about it from Johnson, who calls out to him and says, boy, how come you ain't come over here and check on me in a couple of days? You ain't even asked if I need my garbage out. He says. I find those things funny because it's a relationship with a mother for real, Israel says. My natural son is no longer here. I didn't see him graduate. Now you're going to college. I'll have the opportunity to see you graduate, Johnson says. I didn't see him getting married. Hopefully one day I'll be able to experience that with you. Hearing her say those things, O'Shea says, gives him a reason to reach his goals. It motivates me to make sure that I stay on the right path, he says. You still believe in me. And the fact that you can do it despite how much pain I caused you, it's amazing. But Israel is not the only one who's impressed. Mary says, I know it's not an easy thing to be able to share our story together. Even with us sitting here looking at each other right now, I know it's not an easy thing, so I admire that you can do this. And he says, I love you, lady. She says, I love you too, son. They shared their stories together. They shared their hurts together. They saw humanity in one another and in the son who was murdered. Mary Johnson expressed that she had a need that had to be filled. She had to see that this young man was remorseful, that he had changed, that he was not the same. And by forgiving O'Shea, Mary gave him a new direction in life. And she's holding him accountable in a way that prison never could. With love. With acceptance. O'Shea is being real about still working out his own feelings. He's still coming to grips with what he's done. Now this is an extraordinary story. Most stories don't end like this. This is the kind of story that doesn't come along very often, and it's rare for the circumstances of forgiveness to line up like this. But this illustrates the miraculous power of forgiveness. This shows us the potential of forgiveness. Mary Johnson could have easily just released O'Shea, Israel, from her life. Just like we can choose to not have someone in our lives any longer, but releasing is refusing to no longer allow that person who hurt you to continue to occupy any space in your thoughts, in your feelings, in your emotions. That your thoughts would no longer be consumed by them. That you'd no longer be triggered by a memory of them or riled up when you think of them. But when we renew a relationship, we're not going back to where before the hurt happened, as if nothing happened. Because we value the relationship, we decide together that we'll create a new relationship out of our suffering. We're in this together. And we're in our relationships with each other. I know this is elementary, but it's so easy for us to decide to just cut each other off.
Amen.
But what happens to one of us happens to us.
Yes.
So when we break relationship, it's vital that we go back and restore and repair if it's at all possible. We renew our relationships when we can. This is always the default. In this way, we keep anger and hatred, resentment, despair, or disappointment from having the last word. We don't want these things to remain in us. Because if these things remain in us, they'll come out of us eventually and hurt other people. There are some important things to say about creating a new relationship. When we renew our relationship with someone who's hurt us badly, we can't just go back to the way things were. This is especially true in relationships where there's been abuse or neglect, control, or manipulation. These and other harmful dynamics can't be present in our most intimate relationships. We can't let that stuff we can't allow those things to remain in our relationships. And so it's important for us to reset the relationship in a way that's safe for us. So we could spend another series talking about how to establish boundaries in our relationships. I'm sorry I don't have more time than to just mention the fact that new boundaries need to be set in relationships where there has been hurt and harm, especially abuse or neglect or control and manipulation. We have to be able to say, you can come this far, but you can't come any further until we build new trust. Until I can see that you'll be faithful and responsible. This values you because who you are is valuable and worth protection. And you are permitted to say, I am allowing you to only come this far in your intimacy with me. I will only share this much with you until you show me that you'll be responsible with what I share with you. You're not obligated to give yourself completely to everyone. Do you hear me? You are valuable. Who you are is important and worth protection. So you are permitted to establish boundaries around the most important parts of who you are. And when people show you that they can be trusted with what you have given them thus far, then you can give them more. But they should show you that they'll be responsible, that they will value you. Is everybody okay with that? What if we have an offense with God? This is a big question. And this also deserves an entire message, maybe even its own series. But is it okay for us to be mad at God? What if we believe something about God that is not true? Is God really good? Do we really believe that? It's really good for us, it's really important for us to be real about how we think about that question. What do we really feel about that question? Do we believe God is really good? We can get convinced that God really doesn't have our best interests at heart. We can get to a place where we blame God for what's not God's fault. Is God to blame for the things that have been done to us? No. Is God to blame for the tragedies of history? Why wouldn't God stop that? Why wouldn't God, don't you hear this all the time in the news? People make these comments a lot. Why wouldn't God stop that shooter from going into that elementary school? Why wouldn't God stop the Holocaust? Why wouldn't God do this? Why wouldn't God do that? Where was God when these things were going on? We can get to a place where we believe something about ourselves that's not true and we shift blame to God. We have to be honest that there are a lot of times we just want things on our own terms. And then when we don't get them, it's God's fault. Anybody with me on that?
Yeah. Blind.
Or we believe that we're not worthy of His love. This is even more dangerous. That we're actually not worthy of His love. That we're not good enough. We're not strong enough. We're not enough. We're not enough. We're not enough. So why would God love me? Why would God be good towards me? Let's go back to our original question. Is it okay for us to be angry with God? David clearly expresses anger with God in the Psalms, doesn't he? Where were you? David asked that question. David asked it. It's okay for us to ask it. He cries out to God to come to rescue him, to protect him from enemies who are trying to kill him. David's most angry at the circumstances, and he always resolves to worship and praise. Even if he's angry at the circumstances, he still gets to a place where he can worship. Amen. David always concludes, "Yet will I praise you." Can we agree that the world is not as it should be? Amen. Creation is broken. Yeah. People are rebellious. Yeah. Selfish and broken. Yeah. And we have an enemy who's out to kill us. Yeah. When accidents happen, we can't blame God. Yeah. When storms come, we can't blame God. When people do terrible things to us, we can't blame God. When the enemy comes against us, we can't blame God. I'm just trying to tell the truth. So where is God? God has been working since creation. Since Adam and Eve rebelled. God has been working to redeem all things. And He has been winning since that point. He has been looking for partners who will say yes to His plan since that day. Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, the prophets, they all said yes to God's plan of redemption. He has not abandoned us. He came to be with us in Jesus, to live in us, to live with us, to live through us. Jesus came to suffer with us, to suffer for us, to serve us, to sacrifice for us, to give the enemy who is against us the ultimate defeat, and to begin the process of redeeming all of creation. God has been fighting for us all along, and He will always fight for us. Amen? Amen? Amen. He has not been sitting idly by, watching things go to hell. He has been fighting for us. Yes. And He has been with us. God loves us like a father loves his children. Yes, yes. And it's forgiveness and reconciliation that brings this to bear on the world. If God is for us, who can be against us? Amen. Amen. He did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us. Does He condemn us? No. What shall separate us from the love of Christ? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress? No. Shall persecution or famine? No. The love of Christ is stronger. The love of Christ is stronger than poverty, than nakedness, than hunger. The love of Christ is stronger than warfare. The love of Christ is stronger than any conflict. The love of Christ conquers all. I believe that this is what Paul is talking about when he says that all things we are more than conquerors. In all things we are more than conquerors. Love can always win. In the hardest things that we go through, love can always win. In the deepest conflicts that seem hopeless, love can always win. In the most desperate losses, love can always win. Nothing can separate us from his love.
Amen.
Not death or life, not angels or rulers, not things present or things to come. Nothing can separate us.
Right.
God is on our side
All the time.
in this.
Amen.
I know forgiveness isn't easy. I know reconciliation isn't easy. But God is on our side. And he fights for us.
Yes.
And nothing can separate us from his love.
Amen. That's right.
Amen. Christina, would you pray for us?